Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Welcome to day 5 of our Xanathar's Guide to Everything week. The first 4 days we looked at all the new class options that exist in the book, but today we're going to be looking at the new guidelines for creating encounters. I'm going to want to compare this sort of to the options in the Dungeon Master Guide, but I'm not going to go through and re-explain too much detail about what the Dungeon Master Guide uses for their outline or their encounter building rules. I did make a video about that recently, which actually went into quite a bit of detail with it. So what I'm going to do is just put a link to that in the description below. So if you haven't seen that and you're interested to see how the two compare to one another, then you can watch that video and then you can watch this one. The short form of it is the Dungeon Master's Guide uses experience point values for the monsters in order to, make the encounters with. So you kind of pool them together, you add together the experience points of the monsters that you'd be awarding if the player characters defeat them, and you kind of gauge that against how many player characters you have in the party of what level, and you use that to determine whether you're creating an easy, medium, hard, or deadly difficulty encounter. So again, just kind of showing, so this is what I had made up with that encounter building information. So again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with that. What I really want to look at are the sample encounter groups that I made. So the groups that I made was an easy encounter that was meant to be a small patrol, which were 2 orcs and a wolf, which added up to 250 experience points total. There was a standard patrol of 4 orcs, an elite encounter of 2 orcs and 1 Eye of Groomish, and the final encounter was just going to be 1 orc and 1 orc war chief. Now these encounters were designed for a group of 4 third-level characters, and it's an example group of 4 third-level characters that I'm going to be using here today. Now, that said, let's move on to the actual way that Xanathar's Guide to Everything does it, and it is completely different in terms of what you're looking at when you're creating the encounters. So instead of using the experience point totals, what you're doing is you're looking at the creature's challenge ratings, and you use those to determine what kind of encounter would be suitable for a group of characters of any level. So the first thing that they do is they give you a chart if you're looking to create just a solo encounter. So you're only looking to face a single monster, and what would the challenge rating of a single monster be that would make for an appropriate encounter for a group of characters. So it gives you your levels from 1st all the way through to 20th, and then it has your party size. So the more characters you have in a party, the more of a challenge you should be able to take on. For example, a standard party size of 4 characters at 1st level can be expected to reasonably take on a challenge rating 1 creature. If you have 5 or 6 player characters in the party, then it's reasonable that you should be able to take on a challenge rating 2 character. Now we are looking at 4th level or 3rd level here. So as you can see, for 3rd level, a group of 4, a challenging encounter would be challenge rating 3 enemy. For 4 characters. For 5, you could have a challenge rating 5 creature, and for 6 characters, you could have a challenge rating of 6. So my party that I'm assuming is going to be made up of 4 3rd level characters. So by that estimation, the highest challenge rating that I should have for a single creature that the player characters face should be a 3. Now you can make the encounters more or less difficult for solo monsters. Now the recommendation here is that the solo monsters would be considered legendary creatures, so I'm not as worried about that. I don't know how many challenge rating 1 legendary creatures there are, or even challenge rating 2 or 3 for that matter, but the idea still stands that a CR3 monster enemy would be a suitable challenge for 4 3rd-level characters. Now, if you want to make that more challenging or less challenging, you would basically move the challenge rating up 1 or down 1, essentially. So if you wanted to have the group of 4 characters take on a challenge rating 4 enemy, then you can certainly do that, and that would make for a more challenging encounter. Now that's for solo monsters, and that one's actually pretty simple and straightforward. That would be the easiest one to go through. However, if you're looking for actual groups of enemies, then things get a little bit more, I don't want to say confusing, but it took me a little bit more reading through. Like, it wasn't something that I was able to understand immediately once I saw it, like I was with the Dungeon Master's Guide. But if you want to have multiple creatures, then what they have here is a chart for the character levels and what the challenge rating equivalents would be for those characters. So it looks confusing, and I can certainly understand, because you got, like, looks like ratios and things like that. So let's just take a bit of a closer look here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit if I can. Alright, so we are looking, let's just start with the first level column, because that's the one at the top and that's the easiest one to keep track of. So if you're looking to create a group of, like an encounter with a group of enemies instead of just a single creature, if you're looking for first level characters, you can have, so the number before the colon is the number of player characters in the party. The number after the colon is how many monsters would be appropriate for the number of characters before the colon for the level on the chart, which again, it does sound confusing. So let's just break this down to, at first level, if you want to have multiple enemies, you could have 2 challenge rating 1/8 creatures for every 1 first level character in the party. If you're looking to have challenge rating 1/4, then it would be 1 for 1. So I think challenge rating 1/8, I want to say kobolds fall into that. So you could have 2 kobolds per player character, and it'd still be considered a manageable encounter. I want to say goblins are 1/4. So you can have an encounter of 1 goblin per player character at first level, and then after that, things get quite a bit more difficult. So for example, a challenge rating 1/2 creature, like a normal orc, it's recommended that you only use 1 of those for every 3 first level characters in the party. And for a challenge rating 1 creature, then you'd want to have 5 first level characters for each one of the monsters that you would put them up against that is at a challenge rating 1. And then it just doesn't recommend challenge rating 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Now again, we're going to be looking at our 3rd level characters. Let's just have a look here. I'm just going to write this down separately on a piece of paper, so just bear with me here. I'm going to do it in marker so that hopefully it shows up. So for 3rd level, so for each, okay, so for challenge rating 1/8, you can have 5 per PC. Challenge rating 1/4 would be 2 per PC. For challenge rating 1/2, it is 1 per PC. Challenge rating 1 is 1 per 2 PCs. Challenge rating 2 is 1 per 4 PCs. And again, hopefully when I kind of show the chart here, it won't be too hard to read, because I am a lefty and handwriting for a lefty is usually pretty difficult to decipher. And for 3, it would be 1 per 6 PCs. Okay. So that's what we are working with. So we're going to move on to the next part. So at this point, I no longer really need this particular chart. So I'm going to move on to the monster manual now, and just going to zoom back out. And this is what I just wrote down to make the encounter building a little bit easier. So again, my handwriting is pretty atrocious. And let's just actually do CRs. Okay. So, 3rd level, and we have 4 player characters. Alright, so just taking this very first step. So I've got four player characters, all at 3rd level. So if we look at the CRs, you know, if I wanted to have them fight a group of kobolds, then I could conceivably have them fight 5 kobolds per player character, so up to 20 kobolds in one encounter. And just because that's kind of bothering me just a little bit, I want to make sure that kobolds actually are challenge rating 1/8. It's been a while since I've used them, but I'm pretty sure they used to give out 25 experience points, which was the challenge rating 1/8. Yeah, okay, yeah, so a regular kobold is challenge rating 1/8. I feel better about that. And goblins. Just a regular goblin should be challenge rating 1/4. Okay, perfect. So we are good to go. So, yeah, so if I wanted to have a challenging encounter for the player characters, 4 of them at 3rd level, then I could have 5 kobolds per player character. Otherwise, I could have 2 goblins per player character. Now, the encounters that I want to work on and focus on are going to be similar to the ones that I made with the Dungeon Master's Guide, because I think using the same types of creatures and compare the way that the encounter building options work makes a little bit more sense. So I'm going to focus on the challenge rating 1/2 and sort of up from there. So that is the orcs. So in this situation, you can have 1 orc per player character, or 1 challenge rating 1/2 enemy for each player character. If I wanted to use a challenge rating 1 creature, I should only use 1 for every 2 player characters. So with a group of 4, I could put them up against 2 challenge rating 1 creatures, and they should have a relatively high expectation of, you know, living through it and you know, being able to overcome the encounter. If I wanted to use a challenge rating 2 creature, at this point I should only be using 1 challenge rating 2 creature for my party of 4 player characters, because it's it's 1 for every 4 player characters. And a challenge rating 3, I should only have 1 of those if I have 6 player characters. Now, there are options in the book, and it does say if you want to create easy or difficult encounters, what you could do is reduce or multiply your player character number, the number of your player characters, basically by half. So if I wanted to make an easy encounter, for example, I would look at it as if I had 2 player characters instead of 4, and if I wanted to make a difficult encounter, I could look at it as if I had 6 player characters instead of the 4. Now, I still only have the 4, but by using it as if I had 6 player characters, it makes for a more challenging encounter. Now, you can also pool the number of player characters together to find something that works. So, for example, I could have 1, if I want to make a hard encounter, which would be the assumption that I would make an encounter as if I'm designing it for a group of 6 3rd level characters, even though I only have 4. I could have 1 challenge rating 2 creature in there, as well as, so that takes up the value of 4 player characters, but I'm assuming I'm building it as if there were 6. Then I could also throw in 2 challenge rating 1/2 creatures, which would you know, make that a difficult encounter. Or conversely, you can have a bunch of challenge rating 1/4, or even a whole whack of challenge rating 1/8 creatures. And then for anything beyond that, so for example, I could also just have a single challenge rating 3 encounter, and that would be considered a highly difficult encounter for a group of 4 player characters. So, what I want to do is I want to see how easy it would be to create encounters that are going to be close to what I have here. Now, in this particular adventure, I did have, or the thing that I'm planning, I do actually have a deadly encounter in here. So the final encounter with the orc and the orc warchief is meant to be extremely difficult, meaning that it's going to require the players to use smart tactics and to have managed their resources well leading into this encounter. And the expectation is probably going to be that at least 1 or 2 of the characters will probably end up being knocked unconscious during the battle, if not for the entirety of the remaining battle. But so that's sort of what I did there. Now, using these guidelines that we have for Xanathar's Guide to Everything, This, I don't think, would be an encounter that would be easy to put in there, just because this is, and we'll look at this when we get to the challenge ratings here in a moment. So what I want to do, at the very least, is to make one easy encounter. So one easy encounter. So let's just say as if there, and again, yeah, I mean, writing's bad enough, but doing it in like a marker like this, just so it'll show up on the camera better, makes it even harder. But as if there were two PCs. Alright, I want to make one standard encounter. And then I want to make one hard encounter. And that is as if there are 6 PCs. Okay, so we're going to use those guidelines. Now again, we're all looking at third level characters in a group of 4. Now of course we're going to do one as if there's 2, and we're going to do one as if there are, whoops, let's close that bracket off actually, as if there are 6, and see what we can come up with. What I'm interested to see is, because I'm looking at an easy, a standard, and a hard encounter, I want to see if, using those guidelines, if I'm going to be able to create the same encounters. So let's move right into going to our orcs, because again, orcs are what I used for the first encounter, and that's what I want to use for the ones that I'm using in this video. So here we go. So we got our standard orc, which is challenge rating 1/2. We have our orc war chief, which is a challenge rating of 4. So by the guidelines that we have here, we really shouldn't be using him at all. We have the orc Eye of Grumish, which is a challenge rating of 2. And we have an Orog, which has a challenge rating of 2 as well. Now, I didn't use the Orog at all in the previous video. I just did the encounters using the Orc, Eye of Grumish, and the Orc War Chief, as well as a Wolf. So, let's just go to the Wolf here now. And I believe the Wolf is a challenge rating 1/4. So, using this information, we know that for an easy encounter, we should be designing it as if there are only 2 player characters. Looking at our chart, for each player character, what we can do is have one challenge rating 1/2 creature, or we could have 2 challenge rating 1/4 creatures per player character. So, in this situation, I may end up changing the easy encounter. I want to stick to the guideline of the 2 PCs. Now, I could just reduce it by 1 and make it an easier encounter, but I'm going to do this based like on the idea of cutting the party size in half to make an easy encounter, something that would be simple for them to overcome, and without going over the challenge rating ratios here. So, instead of having 2 orcs and just got a bunch of marker on my hand there, so I got to be careful when I touch my book. Won't be able to use my left hand for that now. So using that, I got one challenge rating 1/2 creature that I can use. So I'm going to make one orc, which is CR 1/2. And then I'm going to put in 2 wolves. So it's going to be sort of the opposite of what I did before, which was 2 orcs and 1 wolf. And they are CR 1/4. Okay. So there we go. So now we have our easy encounter. So this is one that is meant to be overcome with very few expenditures of resources. These would be things like wizards just using their cantrips, fighters, not using any of their second wind or action surges or anything like that. So that's what the point of this encounter is. The next thing we're going to do is we're just going to go on to a standard encounter, and that one's going to be pretty simple. The orcs are challenge rating 1/2. This is one that is done as if there are the 4 PCs that are up here in the group. So this is going to be really easy. I'm just going to make 4 orcs, which are at challenge rating 1/2. Okay. So that is our standard encounter. That is one that is meant to deplete the party of some of their resources. So there's a good chance that your wizard may end up using one of their actual spell slots. Conversely, your healer may end up using some of their healing. You might have to take a short rest after one of these encounters and use some of your hit dice. So things of that nature is what this is designed for. And this will be sort of the typical encounter that you would be having with the 4 third level characters that we have for this example. So now we're going to have our hard encounter. So this is something that would probably end up being sort of the end of the dungeon. This would be like the dungeon boss or the final encounter of the adventure itself. So at this point they've probably battled a few of these groups and probably even a few of these. This is one that's likely going to be a one-of encounter. So looking at our challenge ratings, we have, we're doing this as if there were 6 player characters. So we have, what we know we can do is we can have one challenge rating 2 creature in there, and it just so happens that the Orc Eye of Grimish is challenge rating 2. So we will do the Orc Eye of Grimish, which is a CR2, and we have technically we have 2 player characters that haven't been accounted for in this encounter as of yet. So like I said, we've got 4 taken care of out of our 6 by having the challenge rating 2 creature in there. So in this case, what I want to do is just have, again, I'm going to throw in 2 orcs because I have 2 player characters that are unaccounted for as far as the encounter design goes. Now again, these are hypothetical because this is meant to be something that is to challenge your group of players. So we're just going to have 2 orcs, and they are CR 1/2. Alright. So there you go. That's basically the encounter building options that are outlined in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. So before we do that, though, there is just one last thing that I want to show off, and that is our quick matchups. So these quick matchups are something you can do if you want to have multiple monsters again for player characters and you just want something that's kind of quick and dirty to put together. So the way that this works is you have your character level from 1st to 20th, and then you have something for 1 monster, 2 monsters, or 4 monsters. Now this is 1, 2, or 4 monsters per player character, and that's one thing that it does say in the description here, is that this is for each of the player characters involved. But it's something that really should have been communicated, I think, on the chart for quick reference, because at this point you're thinking, maybe that the character level, like a first level character, or first level party, like it's something that should just say per character, like, monsters per player character or per PC. So using this, again, if we want a single monster per player character, at 3rd level you have 1 challenge rating 1/2 creature per player character, which we already did with our orcs. If you wanted 2, then it would have to be a challenge rating of 1/4, and if you wanted 4 monsters per PC, then you could do a challenge rating of 1/8. So again, if you wanted to have a challenging encounter but you want to have a swarm of enemies for your player characters to go up against, using our 3rd level characters, you could have them face off against, to use the creatures that we had here before, if you wanted to have them, the 4 player characters, face off against 8 wolves, then you could do that. Or you could have them face off against 8 goblins. Or if you wanted to have 4 monsters, then you could have them go off against a group of, what would that be? So 4, so there'd be 16 kobolds. I think I said 20 before, which was wrong, but anyway. So 16 kobolds for you know, 4 third level characters, and so that's just sort of, you know, if you want to do something a little bit quicker than trying to figure out the charts here. So this is just sort of a quick and dirty way of doing it. And the idea isn't really so much to kind of pull your characters together to add the challenge ratings up or to get higher challenge rating creatures. This is just like a quick and dirty, I want to have a standard encounter with, you know, 1 enemy per player character. They're 3rd level, so I know I can use a challenge rating 1/2 creature. So there you go. Now, so how does this compare to our Dungeon Master's Guide version of the encounter building? So the encounter groups are fairly similar. But there is a minor difference. The minor difference would be with the easy encounter. So to kind of use the guidelines that they had there, which was to sort of reduce the player character total by half to make for an easier encounter. Let me just make sure it actually says half, because that's what I've been doing. And that's how I had read it, but yeah, okay. So yeah, you're basically reducing it by half is what they said. The example that they have is that if you had a party of 5 characters, put them up against monsters, that would be a tough fight for 3 characters. Likewise, you can treat the party as up to half again larger. So yeah, so you're reducing it by half. I just want to make sure that I did read that right. Just because I could see myself assuming it wrong and then having it be corrected in the comments. So for our easy encounter, what we have is 1 orc and 2 wolves, which is the opposite build of what we had down here. So the interesting thing is that this is giving out less experience points than the easy encounter was giving out using the rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide, because you had like thresholds that you had worked with. So in this case, the player characters, if they overcame the easy encounter in using the guidelines in the DMG, they'd be getting 250 experience points. 200 for the orcs, because the orcs are worth 100 experience points each, and 50 for the wolf. Using the guidelines here, they're only going to be getting 200 experience points total. So let's just put 200 XP total. So the easier encounters using the guidelines that they have here are going to be easier than what you could come up with in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So that's one thing that's kind of interesting. Now, our standard encounter, which is just 4 orcs, is the same in both, using the encounter building guidelines in the Dungeon Master Guide with the difficulty classes and experience thresholds and all that. We got the same thing. So we have in both cases an encounter that is going to be worth 400 XPs. So that remains the same. And the last one, which would be our hard encounter, which we had here as the elite encounter, is 2 orcs and 1 Eye of Grumish. And we have here 2 orcs and 1 Eye of Grumish. So this is going to give you experience points equal to 650 experience. Alright, so there you go. Now the only thing that they didn't have in the guidelines was the idea of creating deadly encounters, which are ones that do require the characters to use, advanced tactics to carefully, again, maintain their resources before they reach the, that encounter. So that's the one thing that's missing, and that's why I didn't get to make what I would have used as the final encounter for this adventure, which was the 1 orc and the orc war chief. Otherwise, things are fairly similar, and you could probably make an argument that you could simply reduce the the party size by 1 instead of doing it by 2 in order to getting, something that was a bit closer to what we had before with the 2 orcs and the wolf. Or, you could even make an argument that adding the wolf into an encounter with 2 orcs probably wouldn't change the dynamics too much. But there you go. So again, just a very, very similar, but a little bit different. So if I had to choose between Xanathar's Guide to Everything's encounter creation steps and the Dungeon Master's Guide encounter creation steps, I actually prefer the steps in the Dungeon Master's Guide over the Xanathar's Guide to Everything. The main reason is I like the idea of having the experience point thresholds and having sort of more room to work with when you're designing your encounters. I also like the fact that in the Dungeon Master's Guide they do give you guidelines to create what would be deadly encounters. The idea being obviously that you're not going to be using deadly encounters on a regular basis, and that is something that would be considerably quite rare, but something that you shouldn't shy away from using altogether. And that's something that doesn't quite exist in the Xanathar's Guide to Everything. I mean, using their guidelines and using the same circumstances that we had with 4 third-level characters, the highest challenge encounter that I could do is the one that I had intended as being sort of like the mini-boss, about halfway through the adventure that I'm going to use these encounters for. And that would be, in this, using the guidelines here, that would be the encounter that I would probably end up ending the adventure on, or being, the major challenge of the entire adventure. It's not necessarily that this is a bad way of doing it. It's just, again, it's not as clear when you're looking at things. To see these charts with, all these different ratios thrown on there, it took me a moment to sort of wrap my head around. Now, I mean, I read the descriptions, and I did end up figuring it out. But again, it just feels like sort of an unnecessary set of steps where using the experience points to kind of build up and know what your player characters should be able to go up against based off the experience that they earn, to me just makes a bit more sense, and that's the way that I kind of like doing it, and that's the way that they had started doing it with 4th edition, and I actually like that quite a bit. So for me, I still feel like that is the best way to kind of go about designing the encounters from a personal standpoint. But once you wrap your head around like the ratios and how to use those in order to create the encounters, this is something that might end up being a little bit easier for beginners, especially where you're looking at things like making easier encounters, kind of overall for your characters. Like if you're a brand new dungeon master, you probably wouldn't want to run a deadly encounter. So that is something to sort of keep in mind. So this is a a decent way of doing it. And at the end of the day, a lot of the encounter groups did end up coming out somewhat similar. They actually more or less came out the same. The only thing is that, again, to make the easy encounter following their guidelines, it made the easy encounter easier, with everything else sort of being the exact same. So there you go. Again, overall, I prefer the Dungeon Master's Guide approach. Honestly, I think you could probably even do the DMG version and just drop the multiplier for the multiple monsters, since that's really all that's doing is telling you what difficulty you have. So I would say the best way to probably do it, well, the best way to do it is however is comfortable for you. If you'd rather look at the challenge ratings, then that's fine. I'd rather look at the experience points personally. So let me know what you guys think of the new encounter building mechanics presented in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. What are your thoughts? Which do you prefer? Do you prefer the Dungeon Master's Guide version like I do, or do you prefer the version from Xanathar's Guide to Everything? So I look forward to seeing your comments, and again, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any further questions about encounter design for either version of the Dungeon Master's Guide or Xanathar's Guide to Everything, please don't hesitate to comment. You can message me. You can message me on my Facebook. You can even message me on Twitter, and I'll answer you hopefully as quickly as I possibly can. I would say probably don't message me on YouTube because I don't get a lot of notifications for messages. I just the other day found messages from like 3 years ago that I never knew I had because I never got notifications. But anyway, if you have any questions, like I said, don't hesitate to ask. Let me know what you guys think. And thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.